Hey you guys, welcome back to Flickers of Fear, going back once again to my favorite decade for horror, probably the 1970s for this one. So Bob Clark, he was a very interesting filmmaker. Now, he was born in the United States. I think he was born in New Orleans, actually. But he did most of his most iconic work in Canada. And I think what's most interesting thing about him is that his directorial resume, I guess, is just kind of like all over the map. I mean, he made some real like cult classics like Black Christmas, obviously. Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. He made like a bunch of beloved kind of 80s comedies like Porky's and A Christmas Story. And also in the late 90s and early 2000s, he also made some maybe less than celebrated like family movies, like the Baby Geniuses movies and shit like that. So, you know, just kind of like all over the place, like I said. Sadly, and I actually didn't know this until I was like researching him a little bit for this show, him and his son were both killed by a drunk driver back in 2007. And in 2007, when he was killed, they were actually talking about doing a remake of Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things and the movie that we're talking about today, which is called Deathdream. So in his early days, Clark worked a lot with the actor, director, screenwriter, makeup artist Alan Ormsby, who wrote and starred in the aforementioned Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. He also penned the screenplay for another movie that we talked about on the show, the very underrated Ed Gein-based horror film Deranged, which came out in 1974. Clark didn't direct that, although he did produce it, and Alan Ormsby did write the screenplay for it. So after kind of the cult success, I guess, of Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, which came out in 1972, but a little bit before the kind of, I don't know if it was like necessarily a mainstream breakout, but it was certainly like more well-received like critically and as well as with audiences, of Black Christmas, which, like I said, very, very early slasher. Halloween was super indebted to Black Christmas. But right before that, Bob Clark and Alan Ormsby teamed up on this creepy little anti-Vietnam horror film, loosely inspired by the famous 1904 short story, The Monkey's Paw, by W.W. Jacobs. So the film, which was also released in 1974, a little bit before Black Christmas, I think, is today better known as Deathdream, though prints of it still bear the original title, which was Dead of Night. I assume that the title was eventually changed to avoid confusion with the very well-known British anthology film Dead of Night from 1945, and there was also a British TV series called that in 1972. So I'm assuming they thought that it would be too confusing, so they changed it to Deathdream. Now, Deathdream, in my opinion, is a very, very undervalued 1970s gem. It is a very unsettling, psychological but also supernatural reflection on how the horrors of war can like change a person. And it also has this really, really devastating, like heartbreaking ending, which actually was like really bleak. And I actually, because it's bleak, but I kind of dug it. The film actually features one of only a handful of film appearances by the actor Richard Backus. He would actually later go on to get a bunch of Emmy nominations for his television work in the 1980s. He was an actor on some soap operas, and he did a lot of screenwriting and stuff as well. It also has some very early special effects by Tom Savini, so, you know, there's that. Alan Ormsby's wife, Anya, is also in this movie. And also in this movie is John Marley, who was in Love Story and it was in The Godfather. He was the guy who, the horse head was found in his bed. So there's that. And Lynn Carlin is in this too. She actually got an Oscar nomination in 1968 for the John Cassavetes film Faces. John Marley was in that too, by the way. Deathdream was also shot in my home state of Florida, shot in a town called Brooksville, which is about 45 miles from Tampa. I've never been there, although I did live in Tampa for a little while. So at the beginning of the movie, we see a soldier in Vietnam who we later find out his name is Andy Brooks. Now, he gets shot by a sniper right after witnessing the death of his friend and fellow soldier who was also shot by the same sniper. Like, he's standing there going, oh shit, and then he gets shot too. So it appears that Andy is hit right through the heart, so it's pretty clear that he was killed outright. But then we hear this very eerie, like, woman's voiceover telling Andy that he has to come back because he promised he would. So the story then cuts to the rest of the Brooks family, and they're all sitting at the dinner table. So the mom is Christine, the dad is Charles, and he has a sister she looks like she's been 19 or 20 or something like that, maybe a little bit older, named Kathy. So it's established pretty definitively right away that Dad and Kathy are worried because they haven't heard from Andy for a couple of months. And at this point, they're starting to fear the worst. They think something bad has happened. Mom, though, is kind of just prattling happily along. Oh, everyone's asking about Andy. He'll write soon, and we can't wait to see him when he gets home, and everybody will come over and see him, and blah, blah, blah. So Charles and Kathy are just kind of like glancing at each other with kind of these, uh-oh, mom's delusional kind of expressions. But really, neither one of them have the heart to burst her bubble and be like, hey, it's been a long time. Probably something bad has happened. So they just kind of like politely, very desperately try to change the subject away from talking about Andy. But she's, nothing doing. She just keeps on going on about it. Now, in the middle of dinner, there's a knock at the door. And it turns out that the very thing that Charles and Cindy were dreading all along has come to pass. The visitor is a uniformed guy from the army. He hands the family a telegram telling them that Andy was killed in action, as we saw at the beginning of the film. Now, both Charles and Cindy accept this right away and are just immediately grief-stricken, but Christine is not having it. And she just starts screaming, it's a lie, it's a lie. It's not right. And then she just runs upstairs. And later that evening, Charles actually finds her sitting in the dark in, I think, Andy's room, and she's seemingly talking to Andy while she's staring at a candle. She's sitting in his rocking chair and staring at the candle, and it's almost kind of you promised you'd come back. It's that kind of thing. It's almost like she's doing some kind of low-key incantation or some shit like that. Now, even later that same night, Cindy hears a noise downstairs and wakes her parents up. Now, after a brief little bit of a scare, it's actually not a cat scare, it's a little dog scare this time, which that's an original take. But yeah, so they do that and they don't see anybody at first, but then they notice that the front door is wide open, and then when they investigate further, they find Andy standing in the front room in full uniform, looking fit as a fiddle. Obviously, they're overjoyed. They run over, they start hugging. Oh my God. It's you're here. I mean, and they start figuring, as you would probably if this happened in real life, that the army must have made some kind of clerical error and, send us the early telegram telling you we're dead. But obviously that was wrong. It was a mistaken identity or something like that. So they're super, super happy, as, like I said, you would be. So the family all sit down at the table together, and from the jump, though, it's pretty evident that Andy ain't the same. He doesn't really talk all that much. He won't eat or drink anything. He just looks generally kind of spacey and also kind of menacing, he's just sitting there staring blank-faced into the middle distance, 1,000-yard stare kind of thing. But the rest of the family are kind of too happy to see him, and they're too busy firing questions at him to really notice that he's really off. When Charles tells his son that, he's kind of laughing about it. He's like, the craziest thing, the army had actually told him, they gave us a telegram earlier and told us that you died. And then Andy just gives this really, really creepy, really chilling smile and says, I did. And they're and then there's his long pause, and then everybody starts to laugh, but it's this really awkward, disquieting type of laughing. And this scene is so great because Bob Clark's direction here, I mean, it makes this scene doubly creepy because he just focuses a little bit too closely on the characters' open laughing mouths and their teeth and stuff. So it kind of makes them all look like terror rictuses or kind of fear monkeys or something like that. Because how when monkeys they get mad and they do the teeth display. So it kind of looks a little bit like that, but not overtly, but just enough to be ew, you know what I mean? It's kind of like that. And he also kind of allows this very, very painful forced laughter about this joke to go on for way longer than is entirely comfortable. So yeah, that's a really, really effective scene. I really like that. Creeps me the fuck out. So as the days goes on, Charles, in particular, the dad, he becomes convinced that something is seriously wrong with his son. Now, Cindy, the sister, she kind of suspects something as well, but she's still kind of holding out hope that he'll snap out of whatever this thing is, this phase is that he's in. Christine, though, the mom, is in complete and utter denial. She insists Andy has been through a horrible ordeal in Vietnam, which is true. They can't expect him to just come back home and get back to normal right away. Also true. They're going to have to give him some time. Like I said, this sounds reasonable, but Andy, the way Andy's acting seems to go way beyond any kind of he needs some time for a minor readjustment type of thing. You know what I mean? The guy barely talks. He spends his like entire days just sitting in his rocking chair, staring straight ahead at nothing, and spends his nights like not telling anybody where he's going, but he's basically just wandering around in the nearby graveyard and getting up to some other shenanigans. Now, not only that, as if that wasn't bad enough, before he even arrived back at his family's home, he had actually killed the truck driver who gave him a ride because he was hitchhiking to get back home. Now, no one begins to suspect his involvement in this murder until later, but we as the audience saw it happen. So we know something is horribly, horribly, devastatingly wrong with Andy before his family does, which actually really causes some very effective suspense. There's also kind of a great thing where the various family members' reactions to Andy's behavior start causing like a huge amount of turmoil in the household, especially between Charles and Christine, like husband and wife, and they start having these blistering arguments, which sometimes kind of get physical, like he kind of like slaps her around a little bit, and it's just kind of like, yeah, it's a bad situation. And then later on in, not gonna lie, probably the film's most horrifying scene, I mean, I found it the most horrifying scene, a bunch of neighbor kids kind of come over that I guess Andy used to kind of like hang out with, or, you know, show them how to do stuff like before he went, and they come over and they're like, hey, like check out my karate moves, and, you know, want to play football with us and all this other kind of stuff. And he actually smacks around like one of the kids, and then he picks up his family's dog, whose name's Butch, and just like strangles it like with one hand like that, and it just goes on for such a long time, and it's just awful. It's awful. And like the horrified kids are just like watching the whole time going, what the fuck? And it's just like awful. This sequence, and I'm not gonna lie right here, like I said, you know how much I love animals. This sequence is very, very, very upsetting. So if you don't like to see even fake, I mean, obviously it's fake, but if you don't even like to see fake harm done to animals in movies, you might want to skip it. Kind of wish I had, because like I said, it goes on a very long time, and even though it's not super graphic, just the way that it's shot and the way it's just like really, really, really bothered me, and it's still bothering me now though, like when I'm thinking about it. But yeah, it's, so I'm just telling you is that the dog gets it, so okay, telling you that ahead of time. Now at this point, particularly after the dog gets killed and after he beats up on the neighborhood kid, Andy's dad Charles is very, very certain his son is not really his son anymore. And he kind of starts to have a crisis over whether he should turn Andy into the police after he ends up finding out about the truck driver. They don't know for sure that he killed the truck driver, but, you know, they're like, oh, he arrived in town at the same time. And it's just kind of like, there was a lot of like circumstantial evidence. And so they're just kind of like, it was probably him. You know what I mean? And then later on, the town doctor, who was a friend of the family and said he was going to check out Andy to like see what was wrong with him, like he turns up dead too. So, you know, Andy's dad is pretty much like, yeah, I think my son is like not only a dog killer, but he's actually like a person killer too. So maybe I should go to the cops. And then he can't decide. He's like, he's still my son, and he doesn't really know what to do. And then like he starts drinking, and like I said, he starts having screaming matches with his wife, and it's like threatening to kick Andy out of the house if he doesn't like straighten up and all this other kind of shit. And it's like I said, it's just a really, really bad situation. Like the family situation like really starts to deteriorate. And, you know, Christine, even as bad as it gets, even after Charles tells her, you know, I'm pretty sure he killed somebody, at least one person, she's just like, no, you know, it's not him. It's not him. It was a mistake. And she just doesn't want to hear it. Which, like I said, is understandable, but you can also understand like why the husband is like super mad, because it's like, obviously the boy's not right. So the long and short of the story is that Andy is actually some kind of vampire, zombie, revenant, some type of thing. The exact mechanics of his return are, thankfully, left ambiguous. But what is clear, just very similar to the story of the monkey's paw that this was inspired by, even though that actually had like a magic, you know, thing from, you know, the Orient or whatever the fuck it was, like, you know, that you wished on. This is like that, but it doesn't have that. It doesn't have the MacGuffin or whatever of the monkey's paw. It's basically just, you're led to believe that it was some kind of dark magic that was maybe like set in motion by just the strength of his mother's hopes that he didn't get killed in the war. And her doing these weird like incantations, maybe something heard her and said, okay, well, careful what you wish for, babe. Here it is. And so it manifested itself into reality somehow. So like a zombie, Andy kind of slowly begins to decay over the course of the story, but like a vampire, he seems to restore himself temporarily by drinking the blood of the people that he kills. And I don't think he drinks it out of their neck, but he does tear their throats out, but I think that he kind of like takes it out with a syringe or something like that and like drinks. It's kind of like Martin, now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, but it does seem to, it seems to like restore him for a bit, but then like it's kind of like holding off because he's decaying, he's dead. I mean, he's a dead person, like a zombie. So I mean, the parameters of what Andy actually is aren't really important though, like for the movie. Yes, this is technically a sort of living dead monster kind of movie, but Andy's supernatural affliction or whatever it is also just kind of like a metaphorical device, which is sort of exploring how people who have witness the death and devastation of war might come back from the experience irreparably damaged. Now, like I said, you don't have to read it like that because this is very much like a straight ahead, just creepy horror movie, much in the vein of The Monkey's Paw, like I said, but it's pretty clear that that's what the metaphor is. Like, he's come back from war, he's seen a bunch of horrible shit, and he's not the same. And in this case, that takes that to an extreme, you know what I'm saying? Now, I mean, so if you're into creepy, sort of slow burn 1970s horror, stuff like maybe like Let's Scare Jessica to Death or Alice Sweet Alice or something like that, this is kind of the same, like tonally the same as those. So if you haven't seen it, you should definitely give this one a watch. I think it's really underappreciated. It had like really, really good acting in it, really good special effects. Like I said, Tom Savini worked on it when he was still real young. Had a very, very haunting, like kind of heartbreaking ending, and had some really, really effective sequences that were actually like really unnerving. Like the way it was shot was like kind of unnerving. Also recommended, of course, if you're into Bob Clark's other movies like Black Christmas or Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, or or Alan Ormsby's other work as well. And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. At the moment, it is on Tubi, and it's probably like for free, and I'm sure it's probably on other streaming services as well. So if you haven't seen it and you're into 70s horror, then definitely check it out because it's really, really good. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.